Good morning, everyone, and welcome this morning. My name's Elliot Shaw. I'm the Chief Customer and Strategy Officer at National Highways, and it's a real pleasure to be here to open the Transforming Infrastructure stage here at Interchange. I was given what feels like a rather grand sort of title by the ICE of National Highways, our role in focusing the industry to deliver for planet and society. So I'm going to talk a bit about how we're looking forward and how we think we are going to aim to deliver to meet and ideally to beat the expectations that people and society has of us. So at National Highways, hopefully you may be aware, we're responsible for the strategic road network. So that's the motorways and major A roads across the country. And I think the important thing here is sort of at first sight, people think, gosh, that's an awful lot of tarmac. But it's more than just tarmac. Within that, we've got 20,000 bridges and other structures, so some big complex things, lots of which are aging. We've got over 100,000 bits of technology on the network. Increasingly, our network is technology-enabled, and we rely on that technology to enable it to function well. And we've also got more than 30,000 hectares of soft estate. That's bigger than the Isle of Wight. So in things like biodiversity and other environmental aspects, actually that soft estate is really key as well. So it's a big, complex network. And we would argue that it is the backbone of the transport network in this country and connects to all other modes and enables a huge amount of journeys and transport across the country. So the network, although it's only 2% of all roads, carries 3 times more people every day than the entire sort of UK rail network. Most critically for us as well, it is the backbone of freight in this country. So over 2/3 of all freight transported is transported on the SRN. And the focus on road is particularly true the further you get away from London and the southeast. So obviously I'm conscious we're here in Manchester today. In the north, over 97% of trips are made by road. And we've seen that increasing demand over time as well. And so the network, it plays that vital role. I'll talk more, but industries that deliver over 400 billion of gross value added per year are heavily reliant on the network. And delivering kind of investments in the network can deliver some very strong returns. But one of our biggest challenges there on the bottom right is our network is aging. So most of the network was built in the 50s, 60s and 70s. Unlike lots of things that were created and invented in that time, increasingly needing a little bit more love and attention to make sure they're functioning as we would want them to do. So I'm conscious you're going to have quite a lot of deep conversations over the day. So I thought I'd start it a little bit lighter with a bit of a pop quiz, because I thought that these album covers actually kind of help summarize, kind of how we think about roads and some of the challenges of thinking about roads. So does anyone know what album this is? I'll give you a clue. This is one album, but one was the German cover. Perfect, exactly. Kraftwerk Autobahn, just over half a century old. So on the left, this was the UK cover. So very, I would say, infrastructure-focused, utilitarian, basic, does the job, but, kind of clinical, cold. And that is one way of looking at roads, one way of looking at transport, one way of looking at infrastructure. On the right, this was the German cover, which I think really explains much more how we need to think about our roads and how we need to think about infrastructure more broadly. So you've got free flowing there, so a lack of congestion. You've got a well-maintained road, looks safe. It's green, I think, most importantly, so it integrates well into the environment in which it finds itself. I'd say you could argue it's integrated, so maybe that's a local road sort of going over the top. I think, also they've done an interesting thing. You might see that they've maximised the road space. So certainly on the right, they've taken away the hard shoulder and made full use. But, that's potentially a little bit contentious. So But I do think it is a useful thing that really it's important that too often I think, within the industry, we have thought about infrastructure on the left, and increasingly, we need to make sure that the way that we think about it reflects the one on the right. So I was going to continue that roads theme and give you a sort of top of the pops-esque well, I was actually going to do top 5 rather than top 40 because we've only got 15 minutes. Top 5 countdown of really how we are focusing on delivering for planet and society. And at number 5, I wanted to flag the government's 5 missions for Britain. And because I would reflect that roads, transport and infrastructure are really a critical enabler of the top one of those missions, so that is growth. I think a challenge for us as an industry is kind of making sure that that isn't just about new things. So, everyone knows that big new investments, et cetera, they're big enablers of growth. But what's also very important is keeping the networks that we have running really well and running really smoothly. That is the foundation to a well-functioning economy. But I would also say roads, infrastructure and transport more widely have a foundational role in all of the government missions. So if we look at the environment, we are not going to get to net zero unless we decarbonise roads and transport. So surface transport is by far the biggest emitting sector at the moment, but in 10 years' time, that will entirely have changed. In terms of providing opportunity, again, roads, transport, it connects people and businesses to jobs and opportunities, so that well-functioning road network is critical for that. And then in health, one of the things I would say that's really important in health is safety in how we travel. So, for example, on road safety, the OECD has calculated the economic cost of road incidents in the UK to be 1.7% of GDP. So that's a 1.7% drag on GDP because of incidents and, kind of basically our roads not being as safe as they could be. So I think what's critical is we play that foundational role. I think it's important to recognise that growth is obviously a massive focus for us at National Highways. We consider that we have 4 strategic economic roles within that. So the first one is supporting SRN-reliant sectors. So a well-functioning network supports critical sectors like manufacturing, construction, logistics. These sectors deliver over 400 billion a year to the economy. So actually making sure that network works well for them is critical. We also provide that strategic connectivity between the big different elements of the network. So we connect to rail, ports and airports, because what's really important is we need to get goods and people into the country, and we need to get them around the country, and we need to do that in a joined up way. We're key to planning and placemaking as well, as is all sort of transport. It's really key that good transport connectivity can unlock housing and economic development sites. And then what we do and the way we act, we're very conscious, plays a key role in social value and prosperity. Within National Highways, we support about 65,000 jobs within the supply chain. We impact on thousands of communities across the country. So it's really important that the way that we think and we act promotes that social value and wider prosperity as well. And then continuing our top 5 countdown, at number 3, I wanted to flag RIS3. So many of you will be aware that we plan in 5-year road investment periods, and we're currently coming to the end of road investment period 2. We kind of have an interim year coming up, so there's a 1-year settlement that we have for the following year, and we're currently trying to agree with government the 3rd road investment strategy, which will cover the period 2026 to 2031. I won't lie to you, for us it's quite challenging having a 1-year settlement as a 5-year settlement, but it's understandable given I think the government is looking at the wider long-term plans in the round, so it is good for us to be playing into that and have a stable footing going forward. It does create some challenges in the short term though. But for us, as we look forward to RIS3, I think it's important to flag that it's going to be a continued evolution of what we do. Increasingly, we're going to need to think about how we look after our aging network. So it will be a bit more a continuation of that shift in focus towards renewals and maintaining things like those big bridges. And probably there will be fewer big new enhancements compared to RIS1, for example. More digital as well. So as I said, technology is increasingly playing a critical role in how we manage and operate that network. It's really important that technology is maintained and enhanced. I think we want to see more smaller schemes as well. So again, if a government has a real focus on driving growth, smaller schemes, particularly schemes linked to housing, economic development sites, they're the sorts of things that we can get on the ground in the next couple of years, so in this period, and actually really deliver and drive significant growth. So we want to see that rebalance and with the growth of more smaller schemes. We're going to have more environmental focus. I think that's clear. That's not just carbon. Things like water, biodiversity will be critical. And then some of you will be aware that the Lower Thames crossing for us is also a key element sort of within this. We were very pleased to see the Chancellor include the Lower Thames crossing in her growth speech a month or two ago. And we continue to push forward and be hopeful that will be part of the future plans as well. So finally, going on to, not finally, so penultimately, on to number 2. I've slightly cheated here, 2 carbon budgets. So there's been 2 carbon budgets since we developed our net zero highways plan. And so obviously as transport and infrastructure, decarbonisation is critical. And the carbon budget 7 was published last week. And I think it was really interesting to see the progress that's being made. So we developed our net zero highways plan about 5 years ago at the same time as carbon budget 6 was published. It committed us to a 2030, 2040, 2050 plan. So by 2030, we would get net zero for our corporate emissions, 2040, net zero for our construction and supply chain emissions, and 2050 for road user emissions. And I think the good thing when you look at carbon budget 7 is I think it demonstrates the positive progress that's been made so far and the increasing clarity on the way forward to get to that decarbonised state. And so a couple of things relevant to us that I wanted to flag. So that there is a real positivity about the take-up of electric vehicles. So by 2040, approximately 3/4 of cars are expected to be electric, and also 2/3 of HGVs are expected to be electric. And I think it really doubles down on electrification being the solution to decarbonising HGVs as well. Interestingly, with that HGV electrification, it basically recognises that there's not really a case for sort of freight modal shift in terms of decarbonisation because roads are going to sort of decarbonise quicker in terms of that sort of freight take-up. And so the modal shift sort of within there really focuses on active travel, buses, so cycling, walking, etc., which I think is, again, really positive for places as well, and also kind of has some congestion benefits. Across all of this, the charging infrastructure is key, and I think increasingly there's a recognition there's been good progress, particularly around vehicle charging, but the focus is also going to need to shift to think about freight charging as well. So it's, I was going to say a light read, but actually it's definitely kind of worth a read. I think it's very interesting that Carbon Budget 6 has come out. And then finally, at number 1, is I really did just want to flag the need for us to be sort of one industry. So for us, this is about ourselves, but working hand in hand with our supply chain, our partners and our stakeholders. And probably the key messages there in acting as one is, for us, we really do want all of our industry to put the customer at the heart of what we do. It's really important to think about the customer perspective. And again, I think that's, when we talk about integration, which is obviously a huge theme of the conference, coming at things from the customer perspective is key, because none of us is just a road user or a rail user or a pedestrian or a cyclist. Everyone uses different modes. So we need to think about how, as a customer, we provide, how we as an industry provide for our customers. We need to continue our focus on health, safety and well-being, including, again, the safety of the road users, absolutely critical. We need to demonstrate that we can and do deliver consistently. And again, as an industry, I'm sure we'll talk more in the panel, I think this is really key Delivery hasn't been easy, either in roads or I think across the wider transport and infrastructure sector over the last few years, and it's really important that we build the confidence that we can and do deliver consistently. We need to find ways to decarbonise everything that we do. So, as I say, in everything we need to take the carbon out. And then we do need to be efficient in everything we do. Certainly as a public organisation, the public finances are in a pretty tight space in coming years, so that efficiency and making sure that we use every penny wisely is going to be increasingly important as well. I will stop there, but very happy to, go to the panel or answer any questions, but yeah.
Thank you very much, Elliot, for that. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. If I may, we're going to go to the panel shortly, but I think listening to you, one or two questions came straight to me, which, if you don't mind, I'm going to throw that to you straight away.
Go for it.
And I'm going to entertain one or two questions before the panel comes in. And if you have any more questions for Elliot, at that point, I think when the panel sits, you can throw that to him. But there was something you mentioned about shift towards renewals in the future. Now, from a supply chain perspective, how are you ensuring that the team is ready to be able to accommodate this shift?
Yeah, so, I think for us, the big thing is we're trying to be clear, so we're trying to sort of signal, that change in direction. And I think we've been doing that for a number of years. I don't think we're alone in this. Across a lot of the infrastructure networks in this country, they're aging, and there is a need to make sure that they continue to provide the service that they were set up to do. So it's again, I think, a lot of conversations, and then there is a sort of building up our our capability as well. We're conscious that as we expect the supply chain to ramp up, we need to be providing that intelligent client as well. So we're looking at how we build that team up. But then the thing I would say is these things, they can be perceived as a bit all or nothing. This is a sort of continued shifting of the dial. So for us, RIS 2, we spent 40% more on renewals than we did in RIS 1. It will probably be a sort of similar leap again in RIS 2. In RIS 3, and I would expect would continue sort of into RIS 4 as well. So it's also about kind of recognising what you don't want to do, I think, either for ourselves or for the supply chain, is massive steps. But this is a sort of continued sort of, evolution of the direction.
Thanks, Elliot. I think we have roaming mics in the audience. So if you have a question, just show hands and I'll point to you. But one last question from me, if you don't mind. Now, you did mention by 2040, 3/4 of all cars hoping to be EVs.
Yeah.
That's pretty bold. And
it is.
2/3 of HGVs will be EV. Now, I'm very interested in the HGV part because considering the challenges there, is infrastructure ready for this?
Not yet, no.
Will it be ready?
So will it be ready? To be honest, I think we need it to be ready. So if we're going to kind of meet Carbon Budget 7, all of the targets, we need to get the infrastructure in place, and we need to sort of help drive that transition from both sort of, government will have a role to play in terms of sort of incentivising some of that, but the private sector has a role in terms of driving for that, and, we and others have a role in terms of providing some of the enabling infrastructure. But I think it is really interesting how that has shifted. So I think that's one of the big shifts between Carbon Budget 6 and 7, is that sort of sense of direction on freight and on HGVs. Because I think, a few years ago, it wasn't clear where the future would be. There was lots of talk of hydrogen, etc. I think the CCC has sort of said it views electrification as being the route. Interestingly, we were at Amazon a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about they've put an order in for, I think it's 150 electric HGVs. So, they're in a slightly easier position because they're HGVs. Their loads are sort of slightly lighter than if you're carrying steel. So but actually, I think it's really positive that, it feels like we fairly rapidly moved from a couple of years ago you had one or two of these things, and there were sort of trials and almost unusuals to actually, big companies like Amazon sort of putting in orders, and so you can sort of see the start of that curve. I think the challenge for all of us is to really make sure that rate of progress kind of continues at pace.
Indeed, thank you very much, Elliot. Have we got any questions from the audience? Yes, this gentleman, if you just wait for the mic to come to you. Introduce yourself, tell us your name, and take a question.
Hi, Phil Robinson from Langerock. Yesterday there were some interesting conversations around biodiversity, net gain, and reconnecting green spaces that our network has severed.
Yeah.
And there was also conversations about the impact of climate change and flooding events and maintaining the road in the result of these major events. Decarbonisation was one of your targets up there as one of the 5 main areas of your focus. How do those other 2 areas fit in sort of priority terms?
Yeah, they are absolutely up there. So, I mean, obviously decarbonisation, huge challenge for the country, but we have our environmental sustainability strategy, which looks more roundedly at sort of carbon, nature, and communities. And we try and address the whole lot. I think those 2 points are really key. So, firstly, we do see more extreme weather events on the network, and to go back to that sort of looking after the network, I think particularly with sort of heavier rainfall, etc., flooding is an increasing challenge. So I think it really sort of reinforces that need to kind of both do that renewal but also that enhancement. Because we need to kind of create that resilient network. I think that nature connectivity piece is brilliant. I think we would love to do more of that, and we've seen, we've built a number of green bridges, on the A556. I think there's one on the A417 missing link, and we do know the way our network has been built. It does, in places genuinely sort of sever communities and nature, and so I think the more that we can do things like that, it is a real positive. It's one of those things that we're making the case for. It's it's going to be a challenge because obviously sort of public finances are tight and constrained, but I would hope we can continue to make progress in sort of some measured way against all of that.
Thank you very much. Could you just appreciate another hand there? I'll just take one more question before we go to the panel. That's okay. This gentleman in a grey jacket.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Elliot, for a very uplifting talk there. Referring to a recent consultation document from the Treasury, which told us that there's going to be far greater priority of infrastructure expenditure, which drives productivity and growth. I just wonder whether this has any implications for changes in highway projects being prioritised, or for how highway projects are prioritised.
Yeah, so I would say one thing overall is I think that focus on growth is contextually a good thing for us, because I do reflect kind of roads, I say, kind of used across the country, fundamental to freight and the economy. So there is a general, I would say, sort of positivity, I think, from it, because I do think we play a really cool role in enabling growth in the country. In terms of specific projects, I think, so some of the things that we talked about, and I think we could do more, particularly sort of smaller projects. There are lots of quite, what we've traditionally called sort of pinch point type projects, or similarly, we had a growth in housing fund in RIS1, which really played a role in unlocking stalled development sites or housing sites. I think those types of projects are really quite interesting because they're, in the context of big infrastructure, relatively sort of small money, can be delivered in a relatively short time scale and often have great returns. So I think the sort of debate is what I would potentially see is, in an ideal world, we probably do some more of those types of things. obviously the sort of challenge and the counter to some of that is, as I say, I mean, it's no secret, public finances are overall sort of pretty tight. So, you know, everything's kind of being put into the mix and debated at the moment. But on balance, I would see a shift and hopefully a growth in some of those sort of smaller programs and particularly sort of targeted programs around growth and housing development, that side of things.